He grabbed her wrist like she was a piece of furniture he was deciding whether to keep. That was the moment. Not the champagne tray she was carrying, not the borrowed heels that were already cutting into her feet, not the 10,000 euros of debt that had been eating her alive for 6 months. The moment that split Elena Marcelli's life in two was the hand that closed around her wrist in the middle of a room full of people who did not even look up. The man's name was Cesare Riva. He was 60-something, soft in the face but hard in the eyes, and he wore the kind of suit that cost more than Elena made in a year of working 3 jobs combined. He had been watching her all night. She had felt it the way you feel weather changing, a slow, unpleasant pressure building behind everything. When she leaned forward to refill his glass, he set the glass down, reached out, and grabbed her. Not her arm, her wrist. Fingers wrapping all the way around, tight enough that she felt the bones shift. "You," he said, like that was a complete sentence. The champagne sloshed in the flute she was still holding. She didn't spill it. She was good at not spilling things. She had been practicing her whole life. If you've ever had someone look at you like you were an object, not a person, not even a problem, just a thing to be assessed and used, then you already know what Elena felt standing in that ballroom. And if that's never happened to you, count yourself lucky. Because this is the story of what happens when it does, and what happens when someone decides to stop letting it. We want to take a moment before the story begins. If these kinds of stories move you, stories about ordinary people thrown into extraordinary worlds, about love forged in darkness, about women who find themselves in ways no one expected, then hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment and tell us what city and country you're watching from. It means more than you know to see how far a story can travel. Like this video and stay with us until the very end. What's coming will surprise you. Now, let's go back to that ballroom. Elena had not planned to be there. That was the honest truth of it. The job had come through a catering agency she'd signed with 6 months earlier, one of 3 agencies she'd registered with in the first desperate week after the letters from the loan sharks started arriving. This one had called 2 days ago with a last-minute slot, a private event, formal dress required, good pay, location to be confirmed 24 hours prior. The location had turned out to be an address in the oldest part of Milan, a street she had walked past 100 times without ever noticing the iron gate set into the stone wall, or the narrow passage behind it, or the stone steps that descended beneath the street level into what felt like another century entirely. She had thought, going in, that it was a wine cellar converted for private events. That was what the agency contact had told her. A private collector's gathering, nothing unusual, standard service expectations. She had been wrong about almost everything. The ballroom was enormous. The ceiling was vaulted stone, ancient, the kind of architecture you found in cathedrals and old civic buildings, and someone had spent serious money lighting it correctly. Warm amber, deep shadow, the occasional cold white beam picking out artwork hung on the stone walls. The artwork alone made her stop at the bottom of the stairs. Elena had grown up poor. Her father had worked a print shop for 30 years and spent every spare euro on history books and auction catalogs he couldn't afford to bid on. He had dragged her through every free museum in Milan before she could read, naming paintings, naming sculptors, naming centuries. She had resented it at 15. She had grown to love it by 20. She knew what she was looking at in that ballroom. Some of those pieces should have been in institutions. Some of them she recognized from photographs in her father's catalogs, pieces that had officially been lost or were officially owned by estates and foundations and governments. One canvas near the far wall made her breath catch, because she was almost certain it was a Flemish pastoral that a Belgian museum had listed as stolen nearly 40 years ago. She stood there for 4 seconds longer than she should have. Then the supervisor found her and handed her a tray of champagne flutes and told her to keep moving and not make eye contact with the guests. She kept moving. She tried not to look. The guests were not what she had expected either, though she couldn't have said exactly what she'd expected. They were older, mostly. Men in expensive suits, a handful of women whose jewelry caught the light from across the room. They spoke in clusters, low-voiced, and when money changed hands it happened quietly, paperwork produced from slim cases and signed without ceremony. She didn't understand what was being traded. She wasn't meant to. She understood one thing clearly by the end of the first hour. This was not the kind of room you accidentally walked into. Everyone here had been invited deliberately. Everyone here had passed some kind of test she couldn't see the shape of. She was the invisible one. The uniform. The tray. That was what she told herself to stay calm. The man who grabbed her wrist had been drinking steadily for 2 hours. She had refilled his glass 3 times. The 4th time she approached, she was already angling her body slightly away from him, the way women learn to do around men who look at them too long. A turn of the shoulder, a slight lean, the physical equivalent of a no thank you. He had not cared about any of that. His hand was on her wrist before she finished extending the tray, and the grip was immediate and full. No testing, no warning, just possession. "You're the one familiar," he said. "I remember you. You looked at the Brower canvas." She didn't know what to say. Her heart was hitting the back of her ribs. "I don't know what you mean," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Of course you don't." He tilted his head, studying her face the way someone studies a piece they're considering purchasing. "How old are you?" "Sir, how old?" 22. 22. He said it like he was writing it down somewhere. His thumb moved against the inside of her wrist. And what does a 22-year-old who stares at stolen Flemish paintings do with herself when she's not carrying champagne? "I need to get back to work," Elena said. She did not pull her arm. She wanted to. Every muscle in her body was pulling toward the exit. But she had done the math. Standing there, she needed this paycheck. She needed every paycheck. She had 9 days before the men her father had borrowed from came looking for her. She could not afford to make a scene. Cesare Riva had read that calculation on her face. She realized it later. He had seen exactly what she was standing on and had decided to use it. "I'll make it worth your while," he said. "Stay and talk to me for a few minutes. I'll make it very worth your while." "I really can't." "You really can." The pressure on her wrist increased. Not violent, definitive, a demonstration of fact. "The girl who runs this service owes me a favor. One word from me and you're not just let go tonight, you're blacklisted. You understand? So let's have a conversation." He smiled again. Willingly. The ballroom was full of people. No one was looking. Or if they were looking away fast. Elena stood very still and thought about her father. David Marcelli had died 11 months ago, a stroke at 61 in the back room of the print shop he'd worked 40 years. He had died with debts she hadn't known existed, loans taken from a man named Ferraro, a name said quietly in certain parts of Milan, a man who was patient about money right up until the moment he wasn't. The total was 63,000 euros. Ferraro had given her a year to pay it, out of what he claimed was respect for her father's memory. The year was almost up. She had made 11,000 euros in 11 months, working 3 jobs. She was thinking about that number, the distance between 11 and 63, when the room changed. She didn't see him move. She heard it first, a shift in the ambient noise of the room, conversations dimming like someone had slowly turned a dial. Not silence. Silence would have been dramatic. This was subtler and worse. It was the sound of a room becoming collectively, instinctively careful. Then Valerio Voss was standing beside her. He was taller than Cesare Riva by 4 or 5 inches, and he was completely still in the way that certain people are still, not because they're at rest, but because they've decided to stop, and the decision itself carries weight. I was somewhere in his late 30s, dark hair, a face that had been shaped by years of making hard decisions and living with the results. He was not handsome in any soft sense. He was the kind of face you remembered. He was looking at Cesare Riva's hand on Elena's wrist. "Take it off," he said. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that's not actually quiet. Cesare released her immediately. The speed of it was almost involuntary, like a reflex, like touching something hot. He pulled his hand back and straightened in his chair, and his face went through 3 different expressions before settling on something carefully neutral. "Valerio." He said the name like a greeting, but his body said something else entirely. "I didn't realize." "I know you didn't." Valerio still wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Elena's wrist, where the marks from Cesare's fingers were still visible, red lines against her skin. "That's the problem." Elena should have moved. She knew she should have picked up her tray and gotten as far from this as possible. She was frozen. Valerio turned to look at Cesare now, and whatever was in that look made the other man's carefully neutral expression crack slightly at the edges. "She's a guest tonight," Valerio said. Not inventory. She's a waitress. She's here under my roof. A pause, small and terrible. You touched her. Cesare's mouth moved. He recalibrated. Valerio, I meant no disrespect. Stand up. The room had gone as quiet as it was going to get. Elena was aware of every eye in the place without seeing any of them directly. Her peripheral vision was full of expensive suits all turned the same direction. Cesare Riva stood up. Valerio stepped closer to him, not close enough to touch, but close enough that the distance between them became the only thing in the room. You'll apologize to her, he said, and then you'll leave. I apologize. Cesare said it to somewhere between Valerio's shoulder and Elena's face, not quite meeting either of their eyes. It won't happen again. No, said Valerio. It won't. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact being stated about the future. Cesare seemed to understand the difference. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and without another word he walked toward the stairs, and he was gone. The room exhaled. Slowly, carefully, the conversations found their way back. Elena stood in the middle of it with her empty tray and her heart still going at twice its normal speed. Valerio turned to look at her properly for the first time. She had expected. She didn't know what she'd expected. Dismissal, maybe. A look that said the matter was handled and she could go back to being invisible. Instead, he looked at her the way her father used to look at pieces in museum catalogs. Not with desire, with attention. Are you hurt? He asked. She looked down at her wrist. The marks were fading. No. You looked at the Brower canvas earlier. She stiffened. I didn't mean to. You were right about it, he said. Belgian, not Dutch. Most people miss that. She stared at him. I'm Valerio, he said. This is my house. She hadn't known what to say to any of the things he'd just said. And she didn't know what to say to that either, so she said the only thing she could think of. I have to get back to work. Something in his expression shifted. It wasn't quite a smile. Of course. He stepped aside. Elena. She stopped. She had not told him her name. He was already turning away, moving back toward the center of the room. And she was left standing there with her empty tray and the knowledge that somehow, in a room where she was supposed to be invisible, this man had known exactly who she was. She went back to work. She refilled glasses. She moved through the rest of the evening on automatic, hands steady, face composed, the way she had learned to operate when her body was frightened and her brain had to keep going anyway. At the end of the night, when the guests had filtered out and the catering staff were gathering near the stairs, a man in a dark jacket approached her. Not Valerio, someone else, older, compact, with the face of a person who managed things for a living and was good at it. He handed her an envelope. Your pay for tonight, he said, and a message. Inside the envelope was more cash than she'd expected, 3 times what the agency had promised. And beneath the cash, a card. Heavy paper, no logo, just a number and 4 words written in a clear, precise hand. We should speak privately. Elena stood in the cold night air above the street, the envelope in her hands, and she looked at those 4 words for a long time. She knew she should throw the card away. She knew it the same way she knew all the other things she should have done differently in the last 11 months. Filed the paperwork differently, found a lawyer, called someone who might have helped her navigate the mess her father had left. She knew all of it the way you know things you don't have the resources to act on. She had 9 days. She put the card in her pocket and walked to the bus stop in her borrowed heels and thought about 63,000 euros and the face of a man who had known her name without being told. She did not throw the card away. She called the number the next morning. The phone rang 4 times before anyone answered. Elena was standing at her kitchen window when it connected, watching the street below where a delivery truck was double parked, and the driver was arguing with someone about it, both of them gesturing with the particular Italian passion that made even mundane disagreements look operatic. She had been watching that argument for 3 minutes. It was easier than thinking about what she was doing. You called. Not a question. Valerio's voice on the phone was the same as it had been in the ballroom, quiet, precise, with that quality of weight behind it that she still couldn't name properly. You left a card, she said. I did. That's not a normal thing to do. A pause. No, it isn't. She pressed her back against the window frame. Her apartment was small enough that she could see every corner of it from where she stood. The kitchen that bled into the living area, the single-bedroom door, the stack of her father's auction catalogs. She still hadn't been able to bring herself to box up. The place felt very small this morning. "What do you want to talk about?" she asked. "Not on the phone," he said. "Come to the house. The house where last night, a different entrance, a different time." Another pause, and then, unexpectedly, "I know about Ferraro." The delivery truck argument outside had resolved itself. The street was quiet. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you know?" she asked carefully. 63,000 euros, 9 days. He said the numbers the way you state coordinates, not to wound, just to establish position. "Your father borrowed from a man who does not forgive debts. You have been working 3 jobs for 11 months, and you are still 52,000 short." Her face had gone hot, and then cold, and was settling somewhere between the two. "How do you know that?" "Come to the house," he said again. 3 o'clock. My man will meet you at the same gate." He hung up before she could answer. She stood at the window for a long time after that, her phone warm in her hand, the catalogs stacked in the corner of her vision, and she thought about her father, the way he used to hold a book spine out to read the title without pulling it from the shelf, a habit so particular to him that she could see it perfectly, even now, 11 months after his hands had stopped moving forever. He had borrowed 63,000 euros and not told her why. She had spent 11 months trying to find out and getting nowhere, because the people who knew the answer were not the kind of people who explained themselves to 22-year-old women in small apartments. She went to the house at 3 o'clock. The second entrance was a different street, a different iron gate, and the man waiting for her was not the one from the previous night, but had the same quality: efficient, contained, present without being intrusive. He walked her through a side courtyard and into the building through a door that opened onto a corridor lined with bookshelves, actual floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the books on them worn and real and clearly read. She was shown into a room that was not the ballroom. A study, probably. Large desk, 2 chairs positioned at an angle rather than across from each other, a lamp throwing warm light over papers. The artwork on these walls was different from the ballroom. Smaller pieces, more intimate, a few drawings framed in simple black. Valerio was standing when she came in, which surprised her. She'd half expected to find him positioned behind the desk in the way powerful men arranged themselves, putting furniture between themselves and whoever they were assessing. Instead, he was by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a cup of something hot in his hand. He looked, in that moment, like a man who had been working for several hours and had simply paused. "Sit down," he said. "You want coffee?" "No." She sat in the nearer chair. "Tell me what you know about Ferraro." He turned from the window and looked at her with what she was beginning to recognize as his default mode of attention. Thorough and unhurried, like he had already decided she was worth looking at carefully and was acting on that decision. "Ferraro lent your father money to buy a manuscript," he said, "a Venetian document from the 15th century, authenticated, poorly, by a dealer your father trusted. The manuscript turned out to be a reproduction. Good quality, but not original. Your father lost the entire investment." He sat down in the other chair, the cup held loosely. "He was too ashamed to tell you. He died trying to find a way out that wouldn't touch you." Elena's throat had closed to about half its normal size. "That's—" She stopped, started again. "How do you know all of this?" "Because Ferraro works in my city," Valerio said simply. "And because the dealer who sold your father the reproduction was mine." The room got very quiet. "Yours," she repeated. "He is no longer employed by me. He acted outside his authority and for his own profit." Something moved through Valerio's expression, not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that had been sitting with him for a while. "Your father's debt exists because of a man who worked under my name. That matters to me." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Her heart was doing something complicated. "Is this you apologizing?" "This is me explaining." "And Ferraro, the 63,000? "Will be handled," he said. "The debt will be cleared." She sat with that for 3 seconds. 5. The lamp hummed very softly. "What do you want?" she asked. Because she had grown up with a father who loved art and died with nothing, and she had spent 11 months learning that things which seemed like gifts usually had a weight to them that only showed up later. Valerio set his cup down on the corner of the desk. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, and looked at her with that same unhurried directness. I want you to work for me, he said. Here, in this house. I have an expert, Professor Adrian Bellucci, the best historical authenticator in private practice in Europe. He is old and he is difficult, and he refuses to train anyone I send him. For 3 years he has been working alone, and his work is falling behind. A pause. Last night you identified the Brouwer canvas in 4 seconds. You knew its origin and its status. You are 22 years old and you work 3 catering jobs because you need the money, not because you chose it. Another pause, and this one had a different texture. I want you in this house, working with Bellucci, learning what he knows. In exchange, your father's debt disappears and you receive a salary. How long? She asked. 5 years. Something in her chest shifted, rearranged itself. 5 years is a long time. It is. And if I say no? He picked his cup back up. Then you leave, and Ferraro is Ferraro's problem to solve, not mine. It wasn't a threat. That was the thing. It wasn't framed as a threat, delivered without any of the pressure Cesare Riva had used the night before. It was simply the map of the territory. Here is what exists, here is what doesn't. You choose your position. She sat in that chair in that warm-lit room and felt the weight of 9 days pressing on the back of her skull. And she thought about her father standing in the Brera gallery, telling her the names of painters, as if the names themselves were a kind of wealth you could carry out of there. I need to see the contract, she said. He nodded like he'd expected that. He stood, went to the desk, and produced 3 pages of dense text. He set them on the chair's armrest, not handing them to her, placing them where she could pick them up herself. She read every word. It took 12 minutes. He did not speak during those 12 minutes, which she noticed. The contract was specific. Her role, the parameters of her work, the financial terms, her living arrangements. There was a suite in the east wing of the house. She would not be required to remain on premises except during ongoing projects. She would have access to the full library and the archive. Bellucci's name appeared 3 times. The debt settlement was outlined in a separate attachment, formal and notarized. This clause, she said, pointing to paragraph 9, what does operational discretion mean in this context? It means there are aspects of this house's business you will not ask about. She looked up. You mean I ignore things? I mean you focus on your work and I manage mine. And if I see something I can't ignore? He met her eyes. Then you come to me directly, not to anyone else. To me. It was the most honest thing he'd said so far, and somehow that made it the most troubling. She signed the contract. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself 5 years was the kind of number that looked enormous from the outside and compressed differently once you were inside it. She told herself a lot of things, sitting in that chair with the pen in her hand, and most of them were the kind of thing you tell yourself when you've already decided and are working backward to justify it. She moved into the East Wing 4 days later with 2 suitcases and 11 of her father's auction catalogs. Professor Adrian Bellucci was 73 years old, roughly the height of a medium-sized child, and had the temperament of a man who had been disappointed so consistently by other people's intelligence that he'd stopped pretending otherwise. He met her in the archive on her first morning, looked her up and down once, and said, "You're younger than I expected. That's not a compliment." "I know," Elena said. He looked at her again. "Sit down." She sat. He placed a manuscript on the table in front of her. A single sheet of aged parchment in a protective sleeve, the ink faded to brown at the edges, a hand she didn't recognize written in a language she could only partially read. "Tell me what you see," he said. She looked at it for a long time. She was aware of him watching her, arms crossed, expression giving nothing. She noted the vellum quality, the ink degradation pattern, the particular way the letters were formed at the tops, a style she'd seen in her father's catalogs but never up close. "Venetian," she said. 15th century. Probably administrative rather than religious, given the script style. The ink has oxidized unevenly. There's more degradation on the left margin, which means the document was stored folded and the outer edge took more light exposure. She paused. The vellum has been repaired at the bottom right. It's a good repair, maybe 17th century, so the document itself was important enough to preserve. Bellucci was quiet for a moment. "The ink oxidation," he said. You noticed the margin difference. My father had catalogs, she said. I read them a lot. Catalogs. He said the word with a particular tone that might have been contempt or might have been something else. Sit. We'll see how far catalogs got you. He was a brutal teacher. That was the right word. Not cruel, not unkind in any deliberate way, but completely without patience for approximation. When she was close, he said she was wrong. When she was right, he said she was barely right. When she asked why, he told her the question was the wrong question and to ask a different one. She went to bed the first 3 weeks exhausted in a way she hadn't been since the worst months after her father died. A bone-level tired that had nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with operating at the edge of your capacity all day long. She also went to bed those first 3 weeks more alive than she'd felt in over a year. She saw Valerio at dinner when he was in the house. He was often not in the house. When he was, they ate at the long table in the ground floor dining room, sometimes with other people she was not introduced to, sometimes alone, and he asked her about her work with Bellucci in a way that suggested genuine interest rather than oversight. He made you go over the entire Contarini collection today, he said one evening, 3 weeks in, setting down his fork. How many pieces? 47, she said. And he was wrong about the Contarini seal on piece 31. He knows he was wrong. He won't say it. Something shifted in Valerio's expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. Don't tell him you noticed. I already told him. A beat. And? He threw a catalog at me. She thought about it. A small one. Valerio picked his fork back up. The almost smile was still there. He threw a catalog at the last 3 people I sent him, and then refused to see them again. You must have said it correctly. I told him the seal angle was inconsistent with the confirmed Contarini examples, and that I had photographs from the Ca Rezonico exhibition if he wanted to compare. Evidence, Valerio said. He likes evidence. He likes people who don't shrink, Valerio said. He was looking at his plate when he said it. There aren't many. She didn't know what to do with that. She ate her dinner. The 3rd week brought the first real complication. She had been given access to the archive basement, sub-basement, technically, 2 floors below the main house level, a climate-controlled vault that held pieces awaiting assessment. She was working through the cataloging protocol Bellucci had designed, cross-referencing condition reports with authentication files, when she opened a flat storage drawer and found something that made her stop. 3 pages, laid carefully in a preservation sleeve. Old paper, old ink, hand-lettered in the style of early printed books. Her eyes ran the text automatically, the way Bellucci had been training her to read, not for meaning first, but for material, for age, for construction. She read them 3 times. Then she sat on the cold floor of the sub-basement and thought for a long time, because what she was holding was not what the catalog file said it was. The catalog file described an early printed broadsheet from a Florentine press, common enough, value moderate. What she was actually holding was a handwritten manuscript page, not printed, written, in a hand she had seen in reproduction in one of her father's books, a hand her father had spent 2 pages describing in the margins with the particular excitement he reserved for things he loved. If she was right, and she needed to be careful about that, needed to not be wrong about this, what she was holding was a working draft page from a workshop that had produced exactly 3 confirmed surviving documents in the entire world, all 3 in major institutional collections, all 3 insured at figures that made her ears ring to think about. She put the pages back in the sleeve. She put the sleeve back in the drawer. She went upstairs, found Bellucci in his workroom, and stood in the doorway until he looked up. Sub-basement, drawer 44, she said. You need to look at it. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him put his pen down without argument, which was the first time she had seen him do that. He was in the sub-basement for 25 minutes. She waited in the corridor outside. When he came back up, his face had a color she hadn't seen on it before. Not excitement, something more careful than that. Something that was thinking very hard about several things at once. Who cataloged that drawer, she asked. Not me, he said. Then who? He looked at her for a long moment. You should ask Voss about that. She found Valerio in his study that evening. She knocked, heard a short acknowledgement, and walked in to find him on the phone. He held up one finger without looking at her and finished his call in 90 seconds, not rushing it, completing it, then setting the phone down and giving her his attention. Drawer 44, she said. Sub-basement. The catalog entry is wrong. It's not a Florentine broadsheet. He was very still. What is it? I think you know what it is, she said, or someone in this house does, because the cataloging error is too specific to be a mistake. Whoever wrote that file knew enough to use the right period and the right geographic origin, which means they knew what they were looking at, which means they deliberately mislabeled it. He held her gaze. The lamp on the desk threw a line of light across the papers between them. That document is in this house because I am holding it for someone, he said carefully, measuring the words. It is not mine. The arrangement was temporary. It's been miscatalogued in your archive. Yes. That means if anything happens to it, you're liable for a document that doesn't officially exist in your possession, cataloged as something it isn't, in a collection that is already… She stopped herself. Paragraph 9 of the contract, operational discretion. Already what? He said, and his voice had gone quiet in a particular way. She breathed. Already complicated, she finished. The silence lasted 4 or 5 seconds. Outside, somewhere in the house, a door closed. You're right, he said finally, about the mislabeling, about the liability. He picked up a pen, set it down again. What do you want to do about it? The question surprised her. She had expected deflection, or a version of paragraph 9 recited at her. I want to properly authenticate it, she said. Full protocol. And I want the real ownership documented, whatever that means for you, because if that thing is what I think it is and it goes missing or gets damaged and the authentication trail leads to this archive, understood. He opened a drawer, extracted a file, opened it, started writing. I'll make the calls tonight. She stood there for a moment because she had prepared for an argument and the absence of one left her slightly off balance. Elena. He didn't look up from what he was writing. You were right to bring this to me directly. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed for a while, still in her work clothes, and tried to figure out what she actually felt about the past 6 weeks of her life. The contract had seemed, when she signed it, like a transaction, clean lines. Her labor, his money, her father's debt erased like it had never existed. She had told herself she would treat it that way, keep the boundaries visible, maintain the distance, count the days. But boundaries were harder to maintain when the man you were supposed to be keeping distance from was the same man who asked careful questions about Bellucci, who had positioned her in that study across from the drawer of contracts and waited while she read all 12 minutes of it without pressuring her, who had said, I'll make the calls tonight without asking her to thank him. She was still working out what to do with all of that when the knock came on her door. It was Valerio's man, Enzo, she'd learned, who managed the house's day-to-day operations with the same contained efficiency she'd noticed the night of the ballroom. There's a visitor, Enzo said, at the front entrance. He's asking for you. She frowned. No one knew she was here. She had told the catering agency she was taking personal leave. She had told no one else anything. Who is it? Enzo's expression was professionally neutral, but something moved behind it. He says his name is Ferraro. The name hit her like a hand flat against the chest. She had 9 days when she signed the contract. That had been 6 weeks ago. The debt should have been settled. Valerio had told her it would be handled. It was in the contract language. She had not thought to follow up because she had been buried in the archive and in Bellucci's relentless curriculum and in the particular exhaustion of learning. She had not thought to verify. She was moving toward the door before she finished the thought, and Enzo stepped aside to let her pass, and she was halfway down the corridor before she heard the voice behind her. Elena. Valerio was coming from the direction of his study, jacket on now, the file still in his hand. He had heard, or Enzo had told him, or it didn't matter. He's at your door, she said, and she heard the edge in her own voice. You said it would be handled. It should have been. Something moved across his face, fast, controlled, but real. There was a delay in the transfer. 3 days ago. He stopped. It should have been done. But it wasn't. No. They stood in the corridor looking at each other, and Elena felt the full weight of the past 6 weeks land on her at once. The choice she had made, the ground she'd assumed was solid under her, and the fact that between her and the man at the front door, she had exactly nothing except this man's word, which had just revealed a gap in it. I need to talk to him, she said. You don't, Valerio said. I'll handle… He came here for me. Her voice was flat. He knows I'm here, which means he has been watching me. which means every day I've been in this house, he's known exactly where I am, which means I need to look him in the face and understand what I'm actually dealing with instead of trusting that someone else managed it. She watched something move through Valerio's expression, not anger, something more complicated, the kind of look someone gets when they've been given an accurate assessment they didn't entirely want. "All right," he said. He walked with her to the entrance, not in front, not behind, beside her, which she noticed and filed away somewhere. Ferraro was not what she'd imagined during 11 months of debt notices and third-hand warnings. He was 60, compact, with the kind of pleasant, ordinary face that would be difficult to describe afterward. He wore a good coat. He was standing in the entrance hall looking at the paintings on the wall with apparent interest, hands clasped behind his back like a man at a museum. He turned when they came in. His eyes went to Valerio first, a quick calibration, respectful but not afraid. And then to Elena, and in his eyes when he looked at her was the specific quality she had spent 11 months dreading, the look of a man who knows the arithmetic perfectly and is interested to see if you know it too. "Miss Marcelli," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Mr. Ferraro." She kept her voice level. "The debt." "Ah." He tilted his head slightly. "Yes, about that." He glanced at Valerio. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding about the timeline." "The contract specifies immediate settlement," Valerio said. "The contract specifies settlement within a reasonable period following confirmation of Miss Marcelli's participation." Ferraro reached into his coat and produced a folded document. Not the contract she had signed, something else, something with a different header. He held it out. My copy of the original loan agreement with the late Mr. Marcelli. Paragraph 11. The debt is non-transferable without my written consent." Elena took the paper, read paragraph 11. Her father's signature was at the bottom, and it was unquestionably his. She had seen it on 30 years of birthday cards, on the transfer of deed for the print shop, on the letter he'd left her when he died. The room was very quiet. "You didn't consent," she said. "I haven't been asked," Ferraro said pleasantly. She looked at Valerio. He was reading the document over her shoulder, and whatever he'd expected from this visit, it wasn't this. She could see it in the slight tension at the corner of his jaw, a recalibration happening behind carefully controlled eyes. "What do you want?" Valerio said. Ferraro looked at him with that same pleasant expression and said, with the particular precision of a man who has prepared this sentence in advance, "The manuscript, the one in drawer 44. The silence that followed was not like other silences. Elena felt the shape of the trap close around the room, how long it had been set, how carefully, how the mislabeled catalog entry in Ferraro at the door and the gap in the debt settlement were not three separate problems, but one problem with three faces, and she was standing in the middle of it holding her dead father's signature and understanding, with a clarity that was almost physical, that she had walked into this house thinking she was making a pragmatic choice, and had actually just stepped onto a board that someone else had been moving pieces across for much longer than 6 weeks. She looked at Valerio. He was already looking at her. And in his eyes, for the first time since she'd met him, was something that looked like the beginning of an apology for something he hadn't yet done. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. That was how long it took for the shape of what Ferraro had just said to settle into the room. Not the words themselves, which were simple enough, but the architecture behind them, the years of patience required to build something this specific and spring it at exactly this moment. 3 seconds of nobody breathing quite right, and then Valerio set the document down on the hall table with a care that was more controlled than any gesture Elena had seen him make. "You've been planning this since before she signed the contract," Valerio said. Ferraro tilted his head. Not a confirmation, not a denial. The posture of a man who has already won and is waiting for the other party to finish the math. "The debt notice to her," Valerio continued, his voice dropping half a register. "The timing of it. The 9-day window." He was working through it out loud, not for Ferraro's benefit, for his own, retracing steps, finding where he'd missed it. "You knew she'd come to the ballroom. You arranged it." "I knew she needed money," Ferraro said. "Where she found it wasn't my business." "You knew about the agency," Elena said. Her voice came out flat, which surprised her, because her chest felt like something had been wrung out inside it. "You knew which one I'd signed with." Ferraro looked at her with those pleasant, ordinary eyes. Your father was a thorough man in many ways, less thorough in others. He kept records of his contacts, his agencies, his regular work arrangements. When he passed, those records were available to me as part of the estate assessment. He didn't have an estate, she said. He had a print shop and a stack of books. And a debt, Ferraro said, which transferred. She looked at the document she was still holding, her father's signature at the bottom of paragraph 11. Non-transferable without written consent. A clause her father had signed and probably not fully read, or had read and not understood, or had understood and signed anyway because he needed the money and people in desperate situations sign things. She knew something about that. She put the document on the table next to Valerio's. What happens if Voss gives you the manuscript? She asked. Ferraro's expression shifted slightly, something approving in it, the look of a teacher whose student has finally asked the correct question. Then the debt is settled in full, Miss Marcelli. You're free. Mr. Voss's arrangement with you can proceed as written or not, as you both choose. And if he doesn't, then the debt stands, with interest accrued during the period of non-payment. He paused. The original sum was $63,000. 6 weeks of accrual at the rate your father agreed to brings it to. Don't, Valerio said. The word was quiet. Everything about how he said it was quiet. But Ferraro stopped. The two men looked at each other across the entrance hall, and Elena watched it. The specific grammar of two people who have known each other in some capacity for long enough to have moved past performance. This was not the first conversation they'd had. She could feel the history in the room like a barometric change. You'll need 3 days, Valerio said finally. Ferraro's expression settled. I can give you 3 days. Then we're done tonight. Ferraro buttoned his coat, glanced once more at the paintings on the wall, that museum visitor posture, unhurried, as if he were genuinely enjoying the collection, and walked out the front door. Enzo closed it behind him. The entrance hall felt larger without him in it, and colder. Elena became aware that her hands were not entirely steady. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed once, deliberately. You knew him, she said, before all of this. Valerio had his back to her, looking at the closed door. We've crossed paths. That's not what I asked. He turned. Whatever he'd been managing in his expression while Ferraro was present had not entirely resettled. There was something exposed there, not vulnerable exactly, but unresolved. The look of a man who has had a plan go sideways and is already building the next one while still standing in the wreckage of the first. 5 years ago, he said, Ferraro brought me a collection to assess. 12 pieces, provenance unclear. I passed them to Bellucci. Bellucci authenticated 3 of them as genuine. 2 of those 3 later turned out to be extremely high-quality reproductions. He moved toward the study, and she followed without being asked, because the alternative was standing alone in the entrance hall. The dealer who made those reproductions is the same man who sold your father the manuscript. Elena stopped walking. The same man, she repeated. He worked for Ferraro. He also briefly worked for me as a contractor. That's the connection Ferraro has been holding for 5 years. He reached his desk, didn't sit. If I go to any authority about the mislabeled document in my archive, Ferraro produces evidence that the man who made it also did authenticated work under my name. It doesn't matter that I didn't know. The paper trail is what it is. She stood in the doorway of the study and looked at him. So the manuscript in drawer 44, she said slowly. It was put there deliberately. Yes. By Ferraro, or by someone working for him. Yes. While it was in your archive, mislabeled, you were holding evidence of your own potential liability without knowing it. She heard her own voice working through it, the same way Bellucci had trained her to read a document. Material first, then construction, then meaning. And then I found it and brought it to you. Something crossed his face. Yes. And when I brought it to you, you told me you'd make calls tonight. I was trying to move it before Ferraro showed up to use it. She stepped into the room fully. How long have you known he was watching me? The pause before he answered was a half-second too long. Valerio. I suspected, he said, when you came to the house the first time. The timing of your debt, the window he gave you. It was too precise. I thought if I moved quickly enough on the settlement, I could take the leverage away from him before he used it. But you didn't move quickly enough. No. She sat down in the chair she'd sat in the day she signed the contract, and she put her hands in her lap and looked at her own hands and thought about her father in the back room of the print shop, signing things he didn't fully understand because he needed to and because some debts feel manageable until they aren't. I need to know everything, she said. Not operational discretion, not paragraph 9. Everything about what I'm actually in the middle of. He looked at her for a long moment, then he sat down and he told her. It took 2 hours. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the East Wing bedroom with the lamp on, and her father's catalogs stacked on the side table and went over everything Valerio had told her with the same systematic attention Bellucci had been drilling into her for 6 weeks, looking for the load-bearing structures, the places where things could hold, and the places where they couldn't. Ferraro was not simply a loan shark, he was a collector, not of art exactly, but of leverage. He had spent decades building a network of small debts and contractual vulnerabilities around people adjacent to the legitimate art world, people who could be useful, and he called them when he needed them. The manuscript in drawer 44 was not the endgame. It was a key. What it unlocked was access to a buyer, a specific buyer, someone Ferraro had been cultivating for 3 years, who wanted the document as part of a larger private acquisition, a collection being assembled for reasons that Valerio either didn't know or hadn't told her, and the legitimate authentication trail that ran through Bellucci's work, and now, in the past 6 weeks, through hers, was exactly what made it valuable. Ferraro didn't want the manuscript for himself. He wanted it authenticated, documented, with a chain of provenance that ended in a respected private archive so that it could be sold as exactly what it was to someone willing to pay for exactly that. And Elena had spent 6 weeks becoming the person whose name would be on that authentication. She sat up in bed at 3 in the morning and said, to the empty room, "He needed me to learn fast enough." Then she lay back down and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. She went to Bellucci's workroom at 6:15 before he normally arrived. She sat at the work table with the archive file from drawer 44, and she went through it again. Every page, the preservation sleeve, the catalog card, the condition notes. She was looking for something specific now, something she hadn't known to look for the first time. She found it in the condition notes. 3 lines from the bottom, a notation in a handwriting that was not Bellucci's, smaller, more compressed, with a particular way of forming the letter G that she recognized because she had been reading documents long enough now to notice handwriting the way she noticed everything else. She had seen that handwriting before. She pulled 3 other files from the adjacent drawers, cross-referenced the notation style. Her hands were steady now. The particular steadiness that comes not from calm, but from having passed through the other side of a shock and arrived somewhere functional. The handwriting appeared in 6 archive files, all within the past 8 months, all in the sub-basement. She was still sitting there with the files spread around her when Bellucci arrived at 7. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the files, looked at her face. "Whose handwriting is in the condition notes?" she asked. He came to the table slowly, the way he moved when something had his full attention. He looked at the files without touching them. His face did something she hadn't seen it do before. It aged. Not dramatically. A slight settling, a dropping of something he'd been holding. "Bellucci," she said. "I know whose handwriting it is," he said quietly. "Tell me." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat in it, which he also had not done before. He worked standing, always, claimed chairs made him slow. He sat in this one like his legs had made the decision without consulting him. "His name is Marco Vieri," Bellucci said. "He was my student, 15 years ago. The best student I ever had, which I should not have told him, because it made him impatient with anything less than exceptional." He looked at the condition notes. "He came to me 8 months ago, said he needed access to the archive for a private project, said Voss had approved it." A pause. "I didn't verify." Elena looked at him. "You didn't ask Valerio if it was true." "I trusted him," Bellucci said, and the word came out worn like it had been handled too many times. "Marco. I trusted him." She spread the 6 files out between them. "He's been documenting the manuscript for 8 months, building the provenance trail." "Yes." "Using your archive, your credibility." "Yes." "And your name on the authentication chain means—" "It means the document has the most respected private authentication record in Europe," Bellucci said. He was looking at the files, but she had the sense he was not seeing them. It means anyone buying it has a chain of custody that would hold up to any scrutiny short of institutional forensic testing. He paused. It means Marco used me. The workroom was very quiet. Outside, somewhere above them, she could hear the house beginning its morning. Footsteps, the distant sound of a kitchen, the particular creak of the old building settling. He works for Ferraro, she said. I believe so, yes. And Ferraro has 3 days to get the manuscript from Voss. If Voss doesn't give it to him, then Ferraro uses the liability. Bellucci folded his hands on the table. They were a craftsman's hands, wide and precise, and they looked strange folded like that, too still. He has documentation of Marco's work in this archive. He has evidence the archive is being used for undeclared authentication of disputed provenance documents. He goes to the cultural authorities, and Voss's entire collection becomes subject to investigation. Every piece, the whole archive. He looked at her. Including everything you and I have worked on. Elena absorbed that. The 6 weeks of work. The Contarini collection. The 7 manuscripts they'd fully authenticated. The 3 in process. All of it. Everything I've signed my name to, she said. Yes. She stood up. She gathered the files into a neat stack, squared the edges, set them back in order. Her hands were still steady, and she was grateful for that, because the alternative was not something she had time for. I need to find Marco Vieri, she said. Bellucci looked up at her sharply. Elena, not to confront him, to understand what he's already completed, what stage the authentication is at, whether there's anything in the documentation that I can use. She picked up the files. Do you have a contact address for him? He is not a safe person to approach alone. I'm not approaching him alone. She wasn't sure that was true yet, but she said it with enough certainty that Bellucci didn't push back immediately. Address. He gave it to her. An apartment in the Navigli district, the kind of address that was respectable without being expensive. She memorized it and did not write it down. She told Valerio about Bellucci's former student at 9 that morning. She watched the information hit him. The particular way he went still. Not the controlled stillness from the ballroom, but something different, colder. The stillness of a man recalculating a situation that has just become more compromised than he understood. 8 months, he said. Yes. Bellucci gave him access. He trusted him. He didn't verify. She looked at Valerio steadily. People trust the wrong people. It happens. He heard what she was not quite saying. His jaw tightened slightly. I need to talk to Vieri, she said. No. The authentication documentation is what Ferraro needs to make the manuscript sellable. If I can find out what stage it's at, what's been completed, what's missing, then we have a picture of the actual leverage. Right now, we're negotiating blind. You're not negotiating anything, Valerio said. Vieri is not a student who made a bad choice. He's been running a careful long-term operation inside my house. He's dangerous. He's an art authenticator who built an 8-month evidence trail inside a mafia archive without getting caught. His voice had an edge in it now. Give me some credit for understanding what that requires. She stood her ground. Let me talk to him with Enzo. I'm not going alone. But I need to go because I am the one who found this, and I am the one whose name is on the work he's been building on. And I need to understand exactly what he has before you do whatever you're going to do next. The argument between them was not loud. It was one of the ones that happens mostly in silences and in the spaces between sentences, each of them holding a position, neither entirely wrong, the disagreement between caution and knowledge. He let her go. Enzo drove. She sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past and thought about her father's handwriting in the margins of his catalogs. The excitement in it, the particular slant of letters when he'd found something that mattered to him. She had been angry at him for 11 months for the debt, for the secrecy, for leaving her in a situation he'd known was coming and had not prepared her for. She was still angry. She was also, sitting in that car, beginning to understand the specific shape of a desperation that leads someone to sign things they should not sign because the alternative is unbearable. Marco Vieri's apartment building had an intercom system that he answered on the second buzz. She said her name. There was a long pause. Then the door buzzed open. I was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, lean in a way that suggested he forgot meals regularly, with the kind of face that had probably been trustworthy looking until you looked at it for more than a few seconds. He was standing in the apartment doorway when they came up, and his eyes went to Enzo first, then to her, with the careful, rapid assessment of someone who has been waiting for something to go wrong. "Miss Marcelli," he said. "You know who I am," she said. "I know your work." Something moved in his expression. Genuine, she thought, which made it more complicated. "You're faster than I expected. Bellucci said—" He stopped. "Bellucci told you about me." He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in." The apartment was what she might have expected from his file. Orderly, too many books, a work table covered with documents that he made no move to cover or hide. He had been expecting some version of this visit. She could see it in the arrangement of things, a chair already pulled out, a second cup by the coffee machine. Enzo stayed near the door. She sat. "How far along is the documentation?" she said. Vieri sat across from her. His hands on the table were still. 70%, maybe 75%. The full physical authentication is complete. Material analysis, ink dating, vellum composition. What's missing is the contextual verification, cross-referencing the specific scribal hand against confirmed examples. He paused. "Which is what you've been trained to do." She looked at him. "Ferraro needs me to finish it." "Ferraro needs someone with Bellucci's credibility to finish it. You have that now." Vieri's voice was flat, informational, the voice of someone being precise because precision is all that's left. Without the contextual verification completed and signed by a recognized name in the authentication chain, the document is worth 4 million. With it, it's worth 12, maybe 15. And you've been building toward a Bellucci-credentialed authentication for 8 months. Yes. Using work that is now, partly, mine. Yes, she breathed. "Why are you telling me all of this?" He looked at her for a moment, and in his face was something she hadn't anticipated. Not guilt, not fear, but a kind of exhaustion that looked very old. The exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has stopped pretending it isn't heavy. "Because Ferraro told me something 3 weeks ago," he said. "Something about the buyer for the manuscript." He looked at his hands. "I've been in this business for 15 years. I've done things I'm not proud of. But what Ferraro's buyer wants the manuscript for?" He stopped. "The authentication isn't the end of it. The document is going to be used to establish legal ownership of an entire archive of pieces that have been in disputed custody for 40 years. Political pieces. The kind that belong to institutions, to public collections. Once the manuscript is authenticated and sold, it becomes the foundational document in a provenance claim that unlocks 40 years of contested ownership disputes." Elena was very still. "How many pieces?" she said. 237, Vieri said, "in 7 countries. She thought about the Belgian painting in the ballroom on the night she'd first gone there. The Brouwer canvas. The way she'd recognized it from her father's catalogs, pieces that were officially listed as lost or stolen. "Some of those pieces are already in Ferraro's network," she said. "Some of them are already in Voss's archive," Vieri said quietly. The apartment was very quiet. Enzo near the door had not moved, but his stillness had changed quality. "You came here knowing I'd find out," she said. "You left the handwriting in the files. You answered the intercom." Vieri said nothing. "You want out," she said. He looked at her directly for the first time. "I want it stopped," he said. "There's a difference." She rode back to the house in the front seat of Enzo's car with her hands in her lap, and 237 pieces of art moving through her mind like a catalog she couldn't close. She thought about what it meant, not for Ferraro's plan, but for Valerio, for the archive, for every authentication she had completed in 6 weeks under Bellucci's name, for every document she'd set her own judgment against. She had been building something without knowing what she was building toward. When she got back to the house, Valerio was not in his study. Enzo found him in the ballroom, the actual ballroom from the first night, cleared now, the auction pieces gone, the space returned to its dimensions. He was standing near the wall where the Brouwer canvas had hung that night, looking at the empty rectangle of slightly different stone where it had been. She walked in and stood beside him, a few feet of space between them, and looked at the same empty wall. 237 pieces, she said, in 7 countries. The manuscript isn't the product, it's the key to the whole thing. She heard her own voice, even, clear, the voice she'd been developing for 6 weeks under pressure. And some of those pieces are in your archive. He said nothing for long enough that she thought he wouldn't. 12 of them, he said. I've known about the disputed provenance for 3 years. I've been holding them, waiting for the ownership claims to resolve through proper channels. He paused. That's what I told myself. She looked at his profile. Is that what it was? Another long pause. The ballroom was cold, and the empty rectangle on the wall was very visible. It was what I wanted it to be, he said, and what it actually was are 2 different things. And I've been living in the distance between them for 3 years. He turned to look at her, and his face in that cold room looked like what it was. The face of a man who has been in this life so long that extraction has stopped being a concept he applies to himself. I need you to make a choice. She waited. If you complete the authentication, the contextual verification Vieri says is missing, you give Ferraro what he needs, and your debt disappears, and you walk out of here with 6 weeks of legitimate work, and your name attached to a provenance chain that will hold up for 40 years. He held her gaze. Or you refuse. Ferraro goes to the authorities. The archive investigation begins, and everything in it, including the 12 pieces with disputed provenance, including the work you've already done, goes under scrutiny that will take years and result in consequences I cannot predict and cannot protect you from. She heard the words clearly, all of them. Or, she said. He blinked. There's no third option. There is, she said. There always is. You've just been standing in this room looking at that wall long enough that you stopped looking for it. She turned to face him fully. Vieri wants it stopped. He's not going to walk into a police station. He's too deep in it. But he gave me everything I needed to understand the full structure. The buyer, the provenance claim, the 237 pieces. She watched his face. I'm not an authenticator who stumbled into this. I'm a woman who spent 6 weeks learning how every piece of this system works from the best person in Europe. And I have documentation in my hands of a forgery operation that runs through your archive and Ferraro's network, and a buyer whose identity Vieri told me this morning. The name she said next made Valerio go completely still, not the controlled stillness, the other kind, the kind that happens before something breaks. She said the name again, more quietly, to make sure he had it. He was at the ballroom that night, she said. I served him champagne. He bought 3 pieces. Valerio looked at her, and she could see him rebuilding his entire map of the situation in real time, moving pieces she hadn't known existed into new positions, and she watched the moment it all landed, the full weight of it, what it meant, who the buyer was, and what his name meant in the specific geography of Valerio's world. If I go to the authorities, Valerio said carefully, with the documentation from Vieri, with evidence of the buyer's involvement, you also go with evidence of 12 disputed pieces in your own archive, she finished. Yes. I lose the archive. Probably. The collection. Everything Bellucci and I have built for 20 years. Yes. He stood very still in the cold ballroom. And if I do nothing, he said, if I give Ferraro the manuscript and let the authentication stand, 237 pieces of art disappear into private ownership under a provenance claim that will be legally unassailable, she said. Forever. The word hung between them. She watched him stand inside the worst version of a choice she had ever seen a person face, not the choice between good and bad, which was easy, but the choice between 2 kinds of loss, one personal and one that went far beyond him, and she watched him understand that for the first time in his adult life, the decision he was standing in front of was not one he could manage his way around. What do you want to do? He asked her. And she realized, standing in that cold ballroom with the empty rectangle on the wall and the weight of 237 stolen pieces pressing on the air between them, that no one had asked her that question. Not in 11 months of debt and grief and survival, not in 6 weeks of this house. And that the answer was already there, had been there since she'd sat on the floor of the sub-basement holding a document that should not have existed and had known, in her bones, that she could not pretend she hadn't found it. I want to use what I know, she said. She looked at him. And I need you to trust me enough to let me. She had 24 hours before Ferraro's 3 days were up. That was the first thing she said to Valerio when they walked out of the ballroom. Not a plan, not yet, just the arithmetic. 24 hours to build something that could hold against a man who had been building his version for 8 months, possibly longer. The number sat between them in the corridor like a physical object they both had to walk around. Valerio stopped walking. "Tell me what you need." "Vieri," she said, "and Bellucci, tonight, in the archive." "Vieri is not—" "He gave me the buyer's name. He's already decided which side of this he's on. He just needs someone to tell him there's actually a side to be on." She looked at Valerio steadily. "Get him here." He pulled out his phone before she finished the sentence. Bellucci arrived first, at 8, already wearing his coat over what appeared to be his pajamas, which meant Enzo had called him at home and he had not waited to change. He walked into the archive workroom, saw the 6 files Elena had spread across the table, saw her face, and sat down without being asked. "Marco is coming," he said. Not a question. "Yes." The old man looked at the files. His hands were on his knees. "I should have verified. When he said Voss had approved the access, I should have—" "Professor." She waited until he looked at her. "I need you present. I need your judgment, and I need your name, which is still the most credible name in private authentication in Europe, and I need you to be willing to use it for something that is going to be uncomfortable." She paused. "Can you do that?" He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone reviewing themselves honestly. "Yes," he said. Vieri arrived at 9:15, escorted by Enzo, and he walked into the workroom with the look of a man who has spent the car ride over deciding how much to say and has settled on everything. He saw Bellucci at the table, and his face did something brief and complicated. Not shame exactly, but adjacent to it, the expression of someone looking at the person they most needed to not disappoint and knowing they had. "Adrian," he said. Bellucci looked at him for a long time. "Sit down, Marco." Valerio stood near the door. He had said almost nothing since the ballroom, which Elena had come to understand was not absence but a particular mode of his. He was listening, mapping, running the architecture of what was being said against what he knew. He let her run the room, and she understood that too. She stood at the head of the table and laid it out. "The buyer's name is Renato Cassi," she said. "He attended the ballroom event 7 weeks ago. He bought 3 pieces. She looked at Vieri. "Is he who Ferraro has been building toward for 3 years?" 2 years, Vieri said. "The 3-year number is what Ferraro tells people. It's been 2. Cassi approached Ferraro through an intermediary in Geneva. He had been assembling a legal strategy for the provenance claims for 5 years before that, working with attorneys in 4 jurisdictions. The manuscript was the final piece he needed, a foundational document with an impeccable authentication chain that establishes the continuity of a specific collection's history. He paused. The collection he's claiming was dispersed after the war, various acquisition events, various custodial arrangements over 70 years. He's arguing it never stopped being a single collection, just separated, and the manuscript proves the original collector's intent. "And 237 pieces across 7 countries are the collection," Elena said. "Were the collection. He's claiming they still are." Bellucci had been listening with his hands flat on the table. "The manuscript is genuine," he said. "I've seen the material analysis." "Yes," Vieri said, "it is genuine. That's the part that makes it difficult. Ferraro didn't forge the document. He found it, acquired it through channels, I don't know, and identified its potential. The authentication problem isn't the document itself. It's the contextual claim being built around it. The manuscript proves the collector existed and had specific holdings. It doesn't prove Cassi is the legitimate heir of those holdings. That's a legal argument, not an authentication argument." He looked at Elena. "But a complete authentication record from this archive with Bellucci's chain and your work gives the legal argument enough credibility to survive early challenges." "So if the authentication is never completed," Elena said, "the legal argument is vulnerable. Cassi can still make the claim, but without the foundation document fully authenticated by a credible private chain, every jurisdiction it lands in can challenge it on evidentiary grounds. It slows down. Maybe permanently." The room was quiet for a moment. "What's missing from the authentication?" Elena said. "Specifically." Vieri reached into his jacket and produced a folded document, his own notes, she realized, handwritten in that compressed script she'd identified from the archive files. He unfolded it on the table. The contextual verification of the scribal hand, cross-referenced against 2 confirmed examples, one in the Biblioteca Marciana in Venice, one in a private collection in Florence. The private collection owner is a man named Sarti. He doesn't know his piece is a comparator document. He just thinks he has a nice early manuscript. Vieri looked at her. If someone with authentication credibility visits Sarti and examines the comparator and writes a formal contextual analysis that either confirms or denies the hand match, if it denies it, she said slowly, then the scribal attribution fails. The manuscript's provenance claim breaks at its most critical point. It's still a genuine document, still valuable, but it's no longer the foundational piece of Cassie's legal strategy. It becomes what it actually is, an interesting historical document with unresolved provenance. Can the hand be legitimately denied? Bellucci asked. Vieri met his eyes. The match is close, not definitive. A careful analyst could argue either way within the documented range of variation in that workshop's output. A pause. Elena has spent 6 weeks studying scribal hand variation under you. She knows the methodology. Everyone in the room understood what he was saying. Not falsification, a legitimate analytical judgment that landed on the defensible side of a genuine ambiguity. Elena looked at Valerio. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something between what he'd looked like in the ballroom when he'd seen Cesare's hand on her wrist, and something new, something that didn't have a name yet. Sarti is in Florence, he said. Yes. It's a 4-hour drive. I know. Ferraro's deadline is tomorrow evening. I know. She held his gaze. I need to leave in the next 2 hours. I need Bellucci's formal authorization for the examination, and I need documentation of everything Vieri has told us tonight. Signed, witnessed, preserved somewhere. Ferraro can't touch it. She looked at Vieri. And I need you to write down everything you know about the buyer, the network, the 8 months of archive access. All of it. Tonight. Vieri looked at the table for a moment. Then he picked up a pen from the center of the table and pulled a legal pad toward him and started writing. Bellucci stood up, went to his supply cabinet, and produced his formal letterhead, the kind he used for authenticated reports, heavy stock, his seal at the top. He sat back down and began drafting the examination authorization in his precise, old-fashioned hand. Valerio pushed off from the doorway and came to the table and pulled out the chair beside Elena. I'm driving, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know. He sat. I'm driving. They left at 11. Enzo stayed with Vieri and Bellucci. The authorization letter was in Elena's bag along with the archive files and Vieri's notes, which he had produced in 40 minutes of concentrated writing that filled 9 pages. 9 pages of 8 months. The handwriting was the same compressed script she'd been reading in the archive files for weeks, and she read every word of it in the passenger seat with a penlight while Valerio drove south on the A1. He drove the way she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him, completely, his attention on the road absolute, not performing calm, but actually calm, in the way of someone who has been in worse situations at higher speeds and learned to be present in them. At the 2-hour mark, somewhere south of Bologna, she put the notes away. You have 12 pieces in the archive with disputed provenance, she said. Yes. When this is over, whatever this becomes, those 12 pieces are going to have to be addressed. I know. Not managed, not held, addressed. The motorway was mostly empty at this hour, the headlights picking out 200 meters of road at a time. I know, he said again. Something different in it this time, more weight. She looked at his profile in the dark car. How did you get into this? He was quiet long enough that she thought he'd decline it. Then, my father's business. I inherited the structure of it, the network, the relationships, the archive he'd built over 30 years. Some of what was in it when I took over, I didn't choose. I made choices about what to do with it, and some of those choices were wrong and some were easier than they should have been. He kept his eyes on the road. The archive was the part I believed in. Bellucci was the part I believed in. The idea that you could be in this world and still care about whether things were real. A pause. It's harder to keep those things separate than I thought it would be. She watched the road for a while. My father thought he was buying something real, she said. He wasn't trying to do anything wrong. He just wanted one beautiful, true thing, and he trusted the wrong person. I know. Your contractor, she said, the one who sold him the reproduction. He's been gone from my network for 4 years, Valerio said. That's not adequate. I know that. She turned to look at him. No, it's not. He absorbed that. Didn't deflect it, didn't qualify it, just took it. They drove the rest of the way in a silence that was not comfortable and not uncomfortable, just honest. The kind of silence between two people who have stopped pretending the situation is other than it is. Sarti's villa was outside Florence proper, set back from a road that narrowed to a single lane and then stopped existing as a paved surface. They arrived at 5:30 in the morning. Valerio had called ahead. Someone had called ahead on his behalf. She didn't ask who. And there was a light on in the ground floor when they pulled up. Sarti was in his 60s, a private collector who had inherited money and spent it carefully, and he had the specific energy of a man who had been told at 5 in the morning that someone important needed to examine one of his pieces and had decided, for reasons he hadn't fully articulated to himself, to let it happen. He was in his study in a heavy robe and was politely baffled. Elena set her bag on his examination table, took out Bellucci's authorization letter, and handed it to him. He read it twice, looked up at her. Bellucci sent you personally? Yes. At 5:30 in the morning. It's time sensitive, she said. I'm sorry for the hour. I'll be as quick as I can. He brought the manuscript out himself from a display case in his library. A man who trusted his own handling, which she noted as a good sign. He set it on the examination table under the lamp. She put on gloves. She leaned in. The piece was beautiful, even at 5:30. Even running on 3 hours of sleep and the specific alertness that comes from being this far into something, she registered it properly. The age of the vellum, the particular quality of the ink, the way the letters sat on the page with the confidence of a hand that had made this motion thousands of times. She worked for 40 minutes. Valerio stood near the door. Sarti watched from a respectful distance, the authorization letter still in his hand. She was looking at the formation of specific letters, the way the scribe formed the ascenders on certain characters, the particular angle of the downstroke on the letters that Vieri's notes had identified as the critical comparison points. She had the archive photographs of the Drawer 44 document on her phone. She moved between the physical manuscript and the photographs with systematic care. The match was close. Vieri had been right about that. A less trained eye would have called it definitive. She had spent 6 weeks training her eye to not call things definitive when they weren't. She found it on the 32nd minute, a microvariation in the formation of a specific ligature, a joined character pair that appeared 7 times in the Drawer 44 document and 9 times in Sarti's manuscript. In the Drawer 44 document, the ligature had a specific secondary stroke that was consistent across all 7 instances. In Sarti's manuscript, that secondary stroke appeared in 6 of the 9 instances and was absent in 3, replaced by a slightly different construction that suggested a different position of the hand, a different moment in the writing session, or, more critically, a different scribe working in the same tradition. It was not nothing. It was not everything. It was exactly what she had hoped to find. A genuine, defensible ambiguity that a careful analyst could legitimately interpret as inconclusive. She wrote the analysis report longhand, which was the correct formal method, on paper she had brought from the archive. Bellucci's methodology, Bellucci's structure, her own observations. She wrote it in the precise, neutral language of authentication work, the language that said what it said and did not say what it did not say. Conclusion: scribal hand presents significant similarities, consistent with workshop proximity, but includes variation in ligature construction that precludes definitive attribution to a single hand. Further comparative analysis required before contextual authentication can be confirmed. She signed it. Bellucci's authorization was the covering document. Her analysis was the content. She handed Sarti a copy because he was entitled to know what examination of his piece had found. He read it with the careful attention of a man who cared about his collection, nodded, and asked if he could contact Bellucci directly. "He's expecting your call," she said. They were back in the car by 7. She sat in the passenger seat with the original signed report in her bag and felt the exhaustion land on her all at once. Not the tiredness from before, which had been functional, but the deeper kind that comes after a sustained period of operating at the edge of your competence and getting the result right. Valerio drove north. The light was coming up over the hills east of Florence, pale and flat. "It's inconclusive," she said. "Yes." "That's enough?" "For the legal strategy? Yes. Cassie's attorneys need a definitive attribution, Inconclusive breaks the chain. He had both hands on the wheel. Ferraro is going to know what you did. I know. He will not accept it as the completion of the work he needed. I know. He will go to the authorities. Yes, she said. And when he does, he goes with 9 pages of documentation written by the man who ran the operation, signed and witnessed and preserved. He goes with a formal archive analysis showing deliberate mislabeling. He goes with the buyer's name attached to a provenance fraud spanning 7 countries. She looked at the road. He goes with everything, and so does Valerio Voss's archive and the 12 pieces. He said nothing. I know, she said before he could. I know what that means. The drive back took 4 hours. They got to the house at 11:15. Enzo met them at the door. Ferraro called, Enzo said. Twice. He knows you went to Florence. Valerio looked at Elena. He has someone watching the network. Or watching Sarti, she said. If Sarti is known as a comparator document holder, Ferraro would monitor his contacts. He's moving the timeline up, Enzo said. He wants the document by tonight, not tomorrow. The 3 of them stood in the entrance hall, and Elena felt the compression of time as a physical thing, the hours narrowing around a point that was coming regardless. Then we move first, she said. She spent the next 3 hours on the phone with a woman named Dr. Chiara Ferrante, who was the Deputy Director of Cultural Heritage Enforcement for the Northern Region, a position Elena had found in 40 minutes of research using Valerio's archive database and 2 academic directories. She did not introduce herself as Valerio Voss's employee. She introduced herself as Adrian Bellucci's research associate, which was true, and asked for an urgent appointment regarding evidence of a provenance fraud operation involving disputed cultural property across 7 jurisdictions. Dr. Ferrante had heard many things in her career. She had not heard someone open with 7 jurisdictions and the name of a known private collector in Geneva in the same sentence. The appointment was at 4 o'clock. Valerio sat across from Elena in the study while she made the calls, and she was aware of him watching her the way he had watched her in the archive in the early weeks, with the specific quality of attention that was not oversight, but something more like witnessing. When she hung up from the last call, he said, You understand what happens to me? Yes. The archive investigation, the 12 pieces. My name. Yes. He looked at her. His face in the afternoon light was very clear. All the management stripped away, just the actual geography of it, the years and decisions written there. You're doing this anyway. The 237 pieces belong somewhere other than Cassie's private collection, she said. Your 12 pieces belong somewhere specific, and Ferraro has been running this operation on other people's fathers for long enough. She held his gaze. Yes, I'm doing this anyway. The 4 o'clock appointment with Dr. Ferrante lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Elena presented Vieri's 9 pages, the archive mislabeling documentation, the formal analysis report from Sarti's examination, and the name Renato Cassi, along with the Geneva intermediary Vieri had identified. Valerio sat beside her and, when asked direct questions about the archive, answered them directly. She watched him do it, watched him choose in real time to not manage the information. It cost him. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the particular way he breathed before answering certain questions. He did it anyway. Dr. Ferrante was a precise woman with reading glasses she took off and put on repeatedly throughout the meeting. At the end of it, she looked at Valerio over the top of those glasses and said, Your cooperation will be noted. That's all I can tell you at this stage. I understand, he said. They walked out of the building at 6:40 into the cooling evening air. The city moved around them, ordinary and indifferent. Ferraro called Valerio's phone at 6:55. Valerio looked at the screen, showed it to Elena. She nodded. He answered and put it on speaker. You went to Florence, Ferraro said. His voice was not raised. That was the most frightening thing about it. Yes, Valerio said. The analysis is inconclusive. That's what the evidence supports. A pause. You've chosen a very difficult path. I've chosen the accurate one, Valerio said. There's a difference. Another pause. Longer. Elena was watching Valerio's hand holding the phone. Steady. No change in pressure. I'll be in contact with the authorities by morning, Ferraro said. You understand what that means for the archive? Yes, Valerio said. And for you personally. Yes. A silence that lasted long enough to be a statement. You surprise me, Voss, Ferraro said finally. I didn't think she'd matter enough. He hung up. Elena looked at Valerio. I was looking at the phone in his hand. A vein in his temple was visible, beating. She, Elena said. He thinks you talked me into it, Valerio said. Something in his voice, not quite anger, something cooler and more final. He doesn't understand that this wasn't your argument to make. It was both of ours, she said. He looked at her. The evening light was doing something complicated to his face. Ferraro moves fast, she said. We need to be at the house. Vieri is still there. Vieri needs to be somewhere Ferraro doesn't immediately know about. Enzo can move him. Yes. He was already dialing. They walked toward the car. They were 40 minutes from the house when Enzo's voice came through the phone with a texture in it she hadn't heard before. Not panic. Enzo did not do panic, but the specific compression of someone managing an emergency with the tools available. We have a problem, Enzo said. Vieri is gone. Elena felt the cold land in her stomach. Gone how? Valerio said. He left an hour ago, voluntarily, I think. He took his notes, the copies he kept. A pause. And there's a vehicle outside that wasn't there this morning. Valerio's foot pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward. How many? He said. 2 that I can confirm. Possibly more. Bellucci? Still here. He's fine. He's in the archive. Get him out of the archive. East wing, 3rd floor. Lock it. Yes. He hung up. His hands were correct on the wheel, 10 and 2. The posture of someone who has made a decision about how fast they're going and is committed to it. The motorway was heavier at this hour, and he was threading through it with the same complete attention he gave everything. Vieri ran, Elena said, or Ferraro pulled him. Why would Ferraro pull him now? Vieri has already given everything to us. Because Ferraro knows Vieri gave us everything, Valerio said, which means Vieri is now a liability. Ferraro doesn't leave liabilities in place. He glanced at her once, fast. Neither does Cassie. She absorbed that, the specific meaning of it. He's not safe, she said. No. And the vehicle outside your house is not Ferraro's style, Valerio said. Ferraro uses legal instruments, phone calls, paper. His voice had gone completely flat. The vehicle outside my house is Cassie. She thought about the name. The man at the ballroom. She had served him champagne and he had been pleasant and slightly distracted, the way rich men at private events often were, and she had noticed him only because he'd bought 3 pieces and she'd overheard the amounts. He thinks the manuscript is still in the archive, she said. It is. He's coming for it directly. She thought about the timing. Ferraro calling at 6:55, the vehicle appearing an hour ago. Ferraro told him we went to Florence, told him the authentication failed. Cassie isn't waiting for Ferraro's legal approach. He's cutting Ferraro out. Valerio was quiet for 2 seconds. 2 years of building, he said. Cassie decides in one evening he's done sharing. Yes. Which means Ferraro is also now in a difficult position. Which means by tomorrow morning we may have 2 separate problems instead of 1. The car was pushing its speed. Outside, the city was beginning. The first lights of Milan's outskirts appearing in the dark ahead of them, scattered and then thickening. The manuscript cannot be in the archive when those men get inside, Elena said. Enzo will have thought of that. Where does it go? He was quiet. Valerio, where does it go that Cassie can't follow it in the next 3 hours? He said a name. She didn't recognize it. A person, she thought, or a location, spoken with the particular brevity of someone referring to a thing they know well. Is that safe? She said. For the manuscript? Yes. He looked straight ahead. There's something else. She waited. Cassie has a reason to come to the house himself instead of sending people, he said. Or in addition to sending people. He said the next thing carefully, the way he said things when he needed her to receive them accurately. The 12 pieces with disputed provenance. He knows about them, has known probably longer than I realized. If his legal strategy for the 237 fails, he pivots. He comes for what's physically accessible. Your archive, she said. My 12 pieces, he said. Because if he can take them directly, Not through legal provenance claims, but physically, he has a different kind of leverage. Not in courts, in the specific geography of my world. She understood. Not the law, the other kind. He's not just coming for the manuscript, she said. No. How many people does he bring when he wants to take something? Enough, Valerio said. He's not Ferraro. He doesn't prefer paper. The city was close now. She could feel the change in the air, the density of it, the particular weight of being inside a place with 3 million people, none of whom knew what was moving through it tonight. Tell me what the house looks like right now, she said. Exactly, he told her. The layout she'd been living in for 6 weeks mapped onto the description. The entrance, the corridor of bookshelves, the archive 2 floors below, the ballroom, the east wing where she slept, the sub-basement, the secondary exits she hadn't known about, and he described now in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had always known where the exits were. She listened to all of it with the same attention she brought to manuscripts. Structure first, then construction, then meaning. When he finished, she said, Bellucci is the problem. Yes. He won't leave the archive willingly. Even locked in the East Wing, he'll find a way back down if he thinks the collection needs him. I know. Someone needs to stay with him who he'll actually listen to. Valerio looked at her. No, he said. I'm not suggesting it, she said. I'm saying it needs to happen, and that's the constraint we're working with. Elena, the manuscript goes to wherever you're sending it. The archive documentation, Vieri's pages, my report, everything we gave Dr. Ferrante, is already in official hands. The 12 pieces, she thought. If Cassie comes for them physically, he needs time. He needs to know which ones. He needs to get below the main floor. He needs access to the sub-basement. She looked at Valerio. How long does that take? 20 minutes, minimum, if he has the layouts. Does he? Valerio's jaw tightened. Possibly. If Vieri gave Cassie the layouts before he disappeared, she said. Yes, I know. 20 minutes. She was doing the math, measuring it against the drive time, against the position of the vehicle outside the house, against Enzo's confirmed 2 and possibly more. We need to be there, she said. We will be. And then? He was quiet for the length of one exit passing on the motorway. Then we do what the situation requires, he said, and his voice had the quality of a man who has looked at something directly and stopped softening it. She sat with that. The exit for central Milan was coming up. 15 minutes to the house, maybe less at this speed. She thought about 6 weeks ago, a borrowed pair of heels, a tray of champagne, and a man whose hand had closed around her wrist in a room full of people who weren't looking. She thought about the card in the envelope, the contract on the armrest, her father's signature at the bottom of paragraph 11. She thought about the sub-basement floor under her and 3 pages in a preservation sleeve that had started all of this. And the moment she had understood exactly what she was holding and had known, without question, that she could not put it back in the drawer and walk away. She had never been the kind of person who could put things back and walk away. She had just never been in a situation before that required the full weight of that particular quality. The exit came up, and Valerio took it without slowing, and the lights of the city closed around the car. And ahead of them, somewhere in the oldest part of Milan, the house was waiting with whatever was inside it. And she looked at the road and breathed, and she was ready. They turned onto the street with the iron gate at 7 minutes past 8. The gate was open. It should not have been open. Valerio stopped the car 20 meters short, and they sat in the dark, engine running, looking at the open gate and the darkness beyond it, and the specific quality of the silence from the house. Not empty, she thought, but held, the way a breath is held. He reached across her and opened the glove compartment. She looked at what was inside it. He looked at her. You don't have to come in, he said. She reached past his hand and closed the glove compartment and opened her door and got out of the car. And after a moment she heard his door open behind her, and together they walked toward the open gate and whatever was waiting on the other side of it, and the iron frame of it was cold when she passed through, and she did not look back. The courtyard was wrong in 3 ways. Elena registered them in the order that mattered. The side door to the bookshelf corridor was open when it should have been locked. The exterior lamp above the secondary entrance was out when it had been on at 7 that morning, and there was broken glass on the stone ground near the garden wall that caught the ambient light from the street in a way that meant someone had come over the wall recently enough that no one had swept it up. She did not say any of this out loud. She didn't need to. Valerio had seen all of it in the same 2 seconds. He touched her arm once, not grabbing, just a point of contact, directional, and moved left toward the wall, away from the open door. She followed, staying close, her shoes on the stone as quiet as she could make them. The courtyard was maybe 30 meters across, and they covered it in a low, fast line and pressed against the wall beside the secondary entrance. Inside, the corridor was dark. The bookshelves on either side were shapes in the dark, the spines of thousands of books making a particular texture she had learned in 6 weeks of walking this corridor twice a day. She knew the layout the way you know a place you've moved through without thinking. The turn 12 meters in, the step down at 17, the place where the floor changed from stone to wood. Valerio went in first. She was half a step behind him. The study door at the end of the corridor was closed. Light came from under it. Thin, moving, not the overhead fixture. A flashlight. Someone in the study with a flashlight meant someone who didn't want to be seen from outside. Valerio stopped at the door, put his hand flat on it, looked back at her. She pointed down. Below, the archive, the sub-basement. He shook his head, pointed at the door. She understood. Whoever was in the study was between them and the stairs down. They couldn't get to the archive without going through the study. He opened the door. There were 2 of them, men she didn't recognize, both in dark clothing, one at the desk, going through drawers, and one at the bookshelf, running a flashlight across the spines. The one at the desk heard the door and came up fast, his hand going to his jacket, but Valerio was already across the room, and the movement he made next was the kind she had never seen up close before. Compact, specific, zero-wasted motion. The desk man's hand caught and turned before it finished its reach. A sound that was not loud but final. And then the desk man was sitting on the floor with his back against the desk, and his hand held at an angle that kept him very still. The flashlight man had not moved. He was looking at Valerio with the assessment of someone calculating odds. "Where is he?" Valerio said. Quiet. The same register as always. The flashlight man said nothing. "The floor below this one," Elena said. She was looking at the flashlight man's boots, the same light-absorbing material as the other man's clothing, the same construction. Matched kit. They came in coordinated. Someone is already below. Valerio looked at her, then back at the flashlight man. "How many below?" Still nothing. Valerio released the desk man's hand, carefully, controlled, and the desk man made a sound and held his wrist against his chest. Valerio stepped back and looked at them both. "The authorities were contacted at 4 o'clock today," he said. "Documentation of the entire operation is in official hands. Whatever your employer told you tonight, the situation has already changed." He said it without heat, without threat. Informational. If you're in this house when the response to that documentation arrives, you become part of what's documented. The flashlight man's jaw moved. He looked at the desk man on the floor. "Go," Valerio said. They went. The flashlight man pulled the desk man up by his good arm, and they moved past Elena through the doorway without looking at her. And she heard them through the corridor and then the courtyard, and then nothing. She was already moving toward the archive stairs. The archive level was 1 floor below the study. The sub-basement was 1 level below that. She took the stairs at a controlled run, her hand on the railing, counting the steps automatically the way she had counted them every day for 6 weeks. 14 steps to the archive level. Another 18 to the sub-basement. She got to the archive level and stopped. Bellucci was not in the East Wing. He was sitting at his work table with every light on, a manuscript open in front of him, and a man standing behind him that Elena had never seen before but recognized immediately from Vieri's 9 pages. The description had been specific enough. Compact, dark coat, a face that had not changed expression when she came through the door. Cassie. Not a lieutenant, not a proxy. The man himself, which meant either he trusted his own capability over anyone he could send, or he understood that this particular errand required someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. Probably both. Bellucci looked up when she came in. His face had the particular stillness of someone who has been frightened and has moved through the fear into a kind of resolution on the other side of it. He was not performing calm. He was actually calm, in the way of someone who has decided the only thing within their control is their own behavior. "Elena," he said, her name in his mouth, matter of fact, like she'd arrived for a morning session. "Professor." She stayed in the doorway. Cassie was watching her with flat, direct attention. Is the manuscript still here? No, Bellucci said. Cassie's hand moved to Bellucci's shoulder. Not a grip, a placement. Where is it? I don't know, Bellucci said. Mr. Voss's people moved it before you arrived. To where? I don't know. Cassie's hand applied pressure. Bellucci's face tightened. Not a wince, a controlled registration of pain, the face of a man absorbing something without giving it the satisfaction of a reaction. Elena said, Take your hand off him. Cassie looked at her. The same look Cesare Riva had used in the ballroom the first night. The assessment of a person deciding whether the obstacle is relevant. He had done the math and found it easy. She was 22, she was standing alone in a doorway. She had no physical advantage over him, and he knew it. He was wrong about what she had. Renato Cassi, she said, his full name clearly, in the lit room. Deputy Director of Cultural Heritage Enforcement, Northern Region, Dr. Chiara Ferrante, received a full briefing at 4 o'clock today. Your name. The Geneva Intermediary. The provenance strategy for 237 pieces across 7 countries. She watched his face. The scribal hand analysis from Sarti's collection came back inconclusive. The authentication chain is broken. The legal strategy doesn't have its foundation document. She paused. Whatever you're here to collect tonight, you're collecting it into a situation that is already on record with people who know your name. He looked at her for a long time. You're very composed for someone your age, he said. I've had a long day, she said. The manuscript is not here. Move on. Something changed in his face, not anger, which would have been simpler, something more like recalculation. A man reassessing his board and finding several pieces in positions he hadn't placed them. Valerio came through the door behind her. He had heard it, all of it. He had come in quiet enough that she hadn't heard him on the stairs, which meant he'd come down carefully and had been standing outside the doorway for at least part of the exchange, and he had let her finish it. He stepped into the room beside her. Cassie looked at him. 2 decades of whatever history existed between these two people moved through the room without either of them naming it. It's over, Valerio said. Just that. Cassie stood very still for a moment. His hand was no longer on Bellucci's shoulder. He was looking at Valerio with the expression of a man who has taken a calculated risk and is now doing the cold accounting of what it cost. You burned your own archive, Cassie said. I gave an accurate account to the appropriate authorities, Valerio said. There's a difference. Your 12 pieces are part of that account. Cassie made a sound, not quite a laugh, something shorter and more bitter. 20 years, he said. That archive is 20 years. Yes, Valerio said. A silence that had real weight in it. You'll lose everything, Cassie said. Some of it, Valerio said, not everything. Cassie looked at Elena then. A final look, the kind that's taking inventory. She held it. She did not look away or adjust her posture or give him anything to work with. He left. They heard his footsteps on the stone floor of the archive, the stairs, the corridor above. Then nothing. Bellucci let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. He set both his hands flat on the work table beside the open manuscript and looked at them for a moment. Marco, he said quietly, not to either of them specifically, to the room. Vieri is gone, Elena said. We don't know where. He gave you what you needed, Bellucci said. Yes. The old man nodded slowly. He was always better at seeing the whole picture than at living in it. He straightened in his chair. It's a particular failing. I should have taught him differently. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. She didn't because Bellucci was not the kind of person who found that useful, and because the more honest thing was that it was partly his fault and partly not. And that was the actual shape of most culpability. Messy, distributed, uncomfortable to hold. Can you stand up? She said. I'm not injured, he said, with a flash of the habitual irritation that was almost comforting in its familiarity. The man applied pressure to my shoulder. I'm 73, not fragile. He stood up, steady, and pulled his coat from the back of the chair. The Contarini collection assessment, the 3 manuscripts in progress. What happens to those? She looked at Valerio. The investigation will take time, Valerio said. Some work will be suspended. Some will be preserved if the documentation is clean. The documentation is clean, Bellucci said. He said it with the specific confidence of a man who has been meticulous for 50 years. Whatever else is in that archive, the authentication work is clean. He looked at Elena. Yours included. She absorbed that. We need to get you out of here, she said. Tonight. Somewhere Cassie's people won't follow. I'll go to my sister's, Bellucci said, in Bergamo. I've been meaning to visit her for 3 years. He said it without irony, which made it more affecting somehow. Enzo appeared in the archway. She hadn't heard him come down either, which made her think the stairs were quieter going down than up, and looked at Valerio and received something in that look and nodded. Car in 10 minutes, Professor, Enzo said. Bellucci looked around the archive once, a long, sweeping look, the kind that memorizes. Then he nodded and walked toward the stairs with his coat over his arm. At the archway, he stopped and looked back at Elena. The ligature analysis, he said. The variation you identified in Sardi's manuscript. I read your report. She waited. It was correct, he said. Not convenient. Correct. He held her eyes for a moment. There's a difference. I want you to know that I know the difference. He went up the stairs. She stood in the archive after he was gone and felt the silence of the room. All those documents in their sleeves and folders, all that verified history, the months of careful work, and let herself feel the full weight of what the next weeks and months would bring. The investigation, the questions, the pieces that would leave the archive and go where they belonged, the things that would be lost. She let herself feel it and did not push it away, because pushing it away was what you did when you couldn't afford to sit with something, and she could afford it now, for the next few minutes, in this room. Valerio was beside her, not close enough to touch, just present. Enzo, he said, without raising his voice. The manuscript is secure, Enzo's voice came from the top of the stairs. Ferraro's people haven't moved on the house. The vehicle on the street left 15 minutes ago. Ferraro himself? At home, as far as we can confirm. Valerio said nothing for a moment, then, call Dr. Ferrante's office. Tonight. Tell them Cassie was physically present at this property at approximately 8:15. Give them the description. Yes. Elena sat down on the stool at the nearest work table. The specific exhaustion of the last 20 hours was finding its way into her legs, her hands, the back of her neck. She sat with it. Ferraro will still go to the authorities in the morning, she said. Yes. With whatever he has. Yes. Valerio came and stood near the table. Not sitting, he rarely sat, she had noticed, when things were still unresolved. But what he has is now going into a situation where the authorities already have a broader picture. He is no longer providing context. He is providing a piece of something they can already see the shape of. That's not the same as him having no leverage. No, he said, it's not. She looked at him. What happens to you? He was quiet for a long moment. The archive investigation will find the 12 pieces. The disputed provenance on each one goes into the record. I'll need to cooperate fully with the cultural authorities, probably for years, not months. There will be financial penalties. Some of the collection will be transferred to institutional custody. He said it plainly, the way he said everything when he'd decided to stop softening it. My name will be in the record in ways that will make certain aspects of my previous business unworkable. Good, she said. He looked at her. I mean it, she said. Some of it should be unworkable. She held his gaze. The parts that should work, will. He sat down then. Across the work table from her, the way they had sat in his study on the day she'd signed the contract. The same angle, the same lamp throwing light across the surface between them. You could have completed the authentication, he said. You could have signed the contextual analysis in a way that confirmed the attribution. Ferraro's debt disappears. You walk out of here with 6 weeks of legitimate credentials and a clean slate. And 237 pieces go into private ownership permanently, she said. Yes. And 12 stolen pieces stay where they are because it's easier. Yes. She looked at him steadily. I know. I need to say it clearly, he said. Because you made the harder choice, and I want to say clearly that I understand what it cost. She thought about that. What it cost. The clean exit that hadn't been taken. The debt that was still technically unresolved in the original Ferraro terms, pending the outcome of an investigation that could take years. The 6 weeks of work that might be suspended, reviewed, questioned. The work is clean, she said, echoing Bellucci. Whatever else is in question, the work is clean. Yes. That's the thing I can stand on. She looked at the archive around her, all those sleeves and folders. The rest I'll figure out. He was looking at her with the same quality of attention he'd brought to the Brower canvas question on the night they'd first spoken. Complete, unhurried, like he'd decided she was worth understanding fully and was acting on that decision. Your father, he said. The debt. Ferraro's case becomes complicated by the investigation, she said. His leverage was the clause in paragraph 11. That clause is now part of a documented fraud structure. The legal ground it stands on is not stable. She paused. I talked to Dr. Ferrante about it at 4 o'clock. She wasn't able to promise anything, but she understood the connection. I'll cover whatever remains, Valerio said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He said it simply. The contractor who sold your father the reproduction worked under my name. I've been living in the distance between what I told myself about that and what it actually was. I'm done doing that. He held her gaze. I'll cover it. She sat with that for a moment. The particular difficulty of receiving something without deflecting it. All right, she said. They stayed in the archive for another 20 minutes, not talking much, processing, separately, in the shared quiet of the room. She went through the files on the nearest table, checked the preservation sleeves, made sure nothing had been disturbed by Cassie's visit beyond the open drawers at Bellucci's station. The habits of 6 weeks were fully installed. Her hands moved automatically through the checking process, and she let them. Enzo came down at some point and reported that Bellucci was on his way to Bergamo, that the house was clear, that 2 of Dr. Ferrante's colleagues had called back within the hour, requesting a formal meeting first thing in the morning. Valerio confirmed the meeting without hesitation. At 11 o'clock, they went upstairs. The study had been put back in order. Enzo had been through it, the drawers closed, the desk cleared. The lamp was on. It looked almost exactly as it had on the afternoon she'd signed the contract, except that it was night now, and they were both worn through in the way that only comes from a day that has required everything. She sat in the same chair she always sat in. He stood by the window. Marco Vieri, she said. Enzo is looking. He has 9 pages of signed testimony about the operation. If Cassie finds him before we do, I know. Valerio turned from the window. We'll find him first. She wasn't certain of that. Vieri had chosen his exit precisely, quiet, during the hour when Enzo had been managing the house and she and Valerio had been driving back from the meeting. He had known the window. He had used it, which meant either he had been taken or he had run voluntarily, and if he had run voluntarily, it meant he was afraid enough of what was coming that he had prioritized distance over safety. If he comes in on his own, she said, if he goes to the authorities directly, then he goes in with the 9 pages, Valerio said, and with whatever else he knows about Ferraro's network. It would help the case. Yes. It would also help him. Valerio looked at her. That's what you're thinking about. He built something terrible, she said. He did it for a long time. And then at the last moment, he handed me everything I needed to break it and walked into an intercom on 5 hours' notice. She paused. People are complicated. You can think that and still want them to not disappear into something worse. He was quiet for a moment. You are nothing like I expected, he said. What did you expect? When I looked into you, before you came to the house the first time, your background, your situation. He moved from the window to the chair across from her. I expected someone who needed saving and would be grateful for it. And? You don't need saving, he said. You needed information and access, and someone to stop standing in front of the thing you were already capable of doing. Something in his face shifted. Not the almost smile from the early weeks, something more direct than that. I have spent a long time being the person who arranges situations for people, contracts them, manages them. He looked at the desk. I don't know what to do with someone who looks at the situation I arranged and then walks out of it on her own terms. I didn't walk out, she said. No, he said. You didn't. They were quiet for a moment. The contract, she said. 5 years. The terms were conditional on a stable employment situation in a functioning archive, he said. The situation has changed significantly. Yes. I'm not holding you to it. She looked at him. What if I stay anyway? He was very still. Not on contract, she said. Not because of Ferraro or the debt or the 5-year arrangement. She kept her voice even, not performing calm but actually calm, sitting in the chair that had become her chair in 6 weeks of working in this house. The work here is real. The archive, what's left of it, what comes through the investigation, is real. Bellucci is going to need someone when he comes back from Bergamo, and he will come back because his sister's house will drive him insane in approximately 3 weeks. She looked at Valerio steadily. And you are going to need someone who knows the difference between what you tell yourself and what's actually true. Something moved through his face, slow, real, the specific kind of movement that means a person has been reached somewhere they don't usually let people reach. That's a very uncomfortable thing to offer someone, he said. I know, she said. I mean it anyway. He looked at her for a long time. The lamp hummed. The house was quiet around them for the first time in hours. The investigation is going to be long, he said, and difficult, and there will be periods where things are very uncertain. I know, and my name carries weight in this city that is not always useful weight. I know that too. Elena. He said her name the way he'd said it the first night, in the ballroom, when she'd started to walk away and he'd called her back. The same quality in it. Why? She thought about the honest answer to that question. Not the easy version, the one that made her look uncomplicated, but the actual one, the one that had been forming in her without her fully naming it for the past 6 weeks. Because you looked at me in that ballroom and knew who I was, she said, not what I was worth or what I could do or what I owed. Who? She held his gaze. No one had done that in a very long time, maybe ever. She paused. And because you drove me to Florence at 11 o'clock at night and let me work. And when I came out of Sarti's study with a report that was going to cost you everything, you took the road north without asking me to reconsider. She paused again. That matters to me. I'm allowed to let it matter. The silence after that had a different quality from all the previous silences. Not the quiet of 2 people managing a situation, the quiet of 2 people who have stopped managing. He reached across the desk, not quickly, and set his hand near hers, not covering it, just close, the edge of his hand against the edge of hers, and she looked down at it and then up at him. All right, he said. She turned her hand over. He took it. Outside, the ancient city went about its night. Somewhere in it, Marco Vieri was moving through streets with 9 pages of testimony in his head and a decision still unmade, and sometime before morning he would make it. She believed that, without evidence, the way you believe things about people who have surprised you once. Somewhere in it, Ferraro was sitting with a plan that had broken along its most critical seam and was reassessing. Somewhere, Dr. Ferrante's office had its records and its case, and was building something that would take years and change things permanently. The world was rearranging itself around what had happened in the past 24 hours, and none of that rearrangement was finished, and most of it would be painful. But in this room, in this moment, the 2 of them sat in the lamp's warmth with their hands together and let the night be quiet. The morning came with calls. The first was from Dr. Ferrante's office at 7:15, confirming the 8 o'clock meeting. The second was from Enzo at 7:40. Marco Vieri had walked into a police station in the 3rd District at 6 in the morning with a 9-page document and had asked to speak with someone from the Cultural Heritage Division. He had not been taken. He had gone. Elena heard that second call from the kitchen where she'd been making coffee. Because she had slept in the East Wing for the last time as a contracted employee and had woken up as something else, something without a name yet, which was fine. Unnamed things had their own kind of freedom. She poured 2 cups and brought them to the study. Valerio was already dressed, already at his desk, already reading something. He took the cup without looking up, which was the most domestic gesture she had seen from him, and which made something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. Vieri went in, she said. I know. He set the reading down. Enzo called me at 6:30. And? And I'm glad. He said it plainly. Whatever his reasons were for going in, fear or conscience or calculation, the outcome is the same. His testimony is on record. He looked at the cup in his hand. Bellucci called too. He reached Bergamo safely. He says his sister's house is, and I'm quoting him, organized in a way that suggests she has never once thought carefully about the placement of objects. Elena laughed. It came out real and a little rough at the edges, which was what she had. She didn't have the polished version, never had, and she was done performing it. Valerio looked at her when she laughed. The same quality as always, complete and unhurried. But now there was something additional in it that she'd seen start to form the night before. Something that had taken up permanent residence. And she thought, without performing the thought, just letting it exist, that she was going to spend a long time learning the specific geography of his face, all the parts of it that expressed things he didn't otherwise say, and that she didn't mind the prospect. The 8 o'clock meeting with Dr. Ferrante lasted 3 hours. It was not comfortable. 3 hours in which the archive was formally described in the documentation process, in which the 12 disputed pieces were individually identified and their provenance histories reviewed, in which Elena's role, her arrival, her work, her analysis, the Florence trip, was outlined carefully and completely. Valerio answered every question. He did not redirect, did not qualify beyond accuracy, did not attempt to reframe. At one point, Dr. Ferrante looked up from her notes and said to Elena, "You identified the mislabeled document in the sub-basement." "Yes," Elena said, "and you brought it to Mr. Voss rather than to us directly." "Yes." "Why?" Elena thought about the honest answer. "Because I was still figuring out what I'd walked into," she said, "and because I didn't know what I actually had, or how far it went, or who was connected to what. I needed time to understand the structure before I could explain it to anyone else." She paused. "I got there." Dr. Ferrante looked at her for a long moment over those reading glasses. "You did," she said, and moved on to the next question. At the end of the 3 hours, she outlined what would happen next: a formal archive access restriction during the investigation period, an independent assessment of the 12 disputed pieces, the Ferraro case, which had indeed come in that morning, as predicted, but which was now arriving into an existing evidentiary structure rather than creating one, and an ongoing cooperation requirement from Voss for the duration. She stood to end the meeting and then paused and looked at Valerio. "There are things in that archive," she said, "that have been done correctly. For 20 years. The authentic work, the legitimate authentication chains, those will survive this." She picked up her papers. "I want you to know that I know the difference," echoing Bellucci. Elena thought he'd catch it too, and when she glanced at Valerio, she saw in his face that he had. "Thank you," he said. They walked out of the building into the same kind of morning light that had come up over the Florentine hills on the drive home. Pale, flat, the sky not fully decided yet. She stood on the pavement beside him and let the city be around them for a moment, all its noise and motion, ordinary and indifferent, the way cities always were. "What now?" she said. "Now we go back to the house," he said. "Enzo has 3 more calls to return. There's a lawyer I need to speak with before noon." He paused. "And Bellucci called again while we were inside. I wants to know whether the Contarini assessment files are secured." "They're in the secondary cabinet, top drawer, yellow sleeve," she said. "He knows that. He put them there." He wanted to confirm someone else knew. She understood that. The instinct of someone who has been protecting something for a long time and has just lost access to it. You check that someone else knows where it is, that it matters to someone else. "Tell him I know," she said. Valerio nodded. He was already reaching for his phone. They walked toward the car. The street was busy. Morning traffic, a delivery van, someone on a bicycle threading through the stopped cars with the practiced confidence of someone who had done it 1,000 times. The ordinary texture of a city continuing. She thought about her father. She did it deliberately, the way she had started doing things in the past months. Not avoiding the thought, but actually looking at it, turning it over, examining it the way she examined documents. David Marcelli, who had dragged her through museums and named painters and spent his life loving things he couldn't afford, and who had borrowed money he couldn't repay to buy something beautiful that had turned out to be false. He had died before he could fix it. He had died, probably, knowing that he'd left her in it, and that knowledge had probably been the heaviest thing he'd carried in his last months. She wished, standing on a Milan pavement at 11 in the morning, that she could tell him it was all right now, that the man whose contractor had made the forgery had named that as a debt and was paying it, that the piece her father had bought, the fake, the reproduction, had, in a strange and terrible way, been the beginning of something that led to her learning what she was actually capable of. that she was not okay the way people said they were okay when they meant nothing bad was actively happening. She was okay the way you are when you have been through something real and come out the other side knowing yourself better and not hating what you know. She thought she'd tell Valerio about her father sometime. Not everything at once, she was not built for everything at once. But piece by piece, the way you learn a manuscript, which was not from the whole to the parts, but from the material up, from the substance of the thing toward its meaning. There was time for that. The months that followed were what she had known they would be, long and uncertain, and expensive in ways that were not only financial. The investigation moved in the careful way of investigations, methodical and unglamorous, producing documents and assessments and formal records that would outlast everyone in the room when they were created. 6 of the 12 disputed pieces were transferred to institutional custody within the first 4 months. 3 were placed in a holding status pending further provenance review. 3 were ultimately found to have documentation that, while imperfect, was sufficient to support continued private custody under the new formally registered terms. Valerio's name appeared in public records in ways it hadn't before, and some doors that had been open in his previous life closed, and he did not try to pry them back open. He made no appeals to relationships built in the years before. He cooperated fully and he rebuilt from what remained, which was less than he'd had and more than nothing, and he worked with that. Elena kept working. Bellucci came back from Bergamo after exactly 22 days, which was 3 days more than she'd predicted, having apparently made a real effort at his sister's house before concluding it was architecturally irresponsible. He arrived at 9 in the morning, put his coat on its hook, walked into the archive, and began where he'd left off with the specificity of someone who has never accepted that things which are interrupted are truly stopped. He found 2 of Elena's analytical reports on his workstation. He read both of them. He came out of the archive and found her in the study working on correspondence. "The Florentine cartographic analysis," he said, setting one of the reports down. "The attribution you've proposed is correct. The methodology is correct. The conclusion is stated with appropriate ambiguity." He picked it up again. "Send it." "I already sent it," she said. He looked at her. Then, without another word, he went back into the archive. She counted it for what it was. Renato Cassi's legal strategy collapsed within 5 months. Without the authenticated foundation document, the provenance claims for the 237 pieces fell apart in 2 jurisdictions immediately, and the remaining 5 followed in cascade as the supporting structure became visible. Cassi himself faced charges in 3 countries, coordinated through the channels that Dr. Ferrante's documentation had opened. It was not quick, and it was not clean, and it was not entirely complete, because these things never were, but the 237 pieces did not go where he had intended them to go, and that was the part that mattered most. Ferraro's case was more complicated. His leverage on Valerio had been neutralized by the investigation context, and without that leverage his position was different. A man with exposure he hadn't intended, and options that had narrowed significantly. He reached a settlement arrangement with the cultural authorities that involved a number of disclosures Elena was never fully briefed on. She did not ask. She had what she needed from that chapter. Her father's debt was formally resolved 8 months after the investigation began, through a legal determination that the original loan agreement's validity had been compromised by the fraud structure it was embedded in. The 63,000 euros dissolved into the paperwork of a much larger case, and she was left standing in a lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon with a document that said the obligation no longer existed, and she stood there for a moment with the document in her hand and felt the specific weight of something she had been carrying for more than a year go out of her body like air out of a held breath. She framed the authentication report from Sarti's examination, the original, the one she'd written by hand at 5:30 in the morning on Bellucci's formal letterhead, with her conclusion stated in the precise, neutral language of someone who had looked at the evidence and said exactly what it said. She hung it in the East Wing room, not because it was decorative, but because it was true, and she wanted something true on the wall. A year after the night of the open gate, she stood in what had once been the ballroom. It was different now, emptied of everything from the auction nights, the stone walls bare. The lighting changed to something more even and less theatrical. The space was in the process of being converted into something else, something she and Valerio had been planning for 3 months, an exhibition and study space for authenticated historical documents, operating in partnership with 2 academic institutions, staffed by researchers who would work under Bellucci's methodological framework and her oversight. It was not what Valerio had built before. It was smaller, quieter, more careful. It would generate a fraction of what the previous operation had generated. He had not once suggested that this was a loss. She was standing near the wall where the Brouwer canvas had hung on the night she'd first come here, looking at the empty stone when she heard him come in behind her. He came and stood beside her. The same distance from the first night, a few feet, and then, as he always did now, slightly less. "The Flemish Pastoral," she said. "The Brouwer. Where did it end up?" "Returned to the Belgian institution last month," he said. "They've put it on display." She nodded. "Good." He looked at the wall with her. "You were right about it," he said. "That first night, in 4 seconds." "I was right about the origin," she said. "I didn't know what I was in the middle of yet." "No. I do now." He turned to look at her, and she turned to look at him, and the room was quiet and large around them and full of light. She thought about how you described a thing that had no clean shape, not a rescue, and not a transaction, and not anything she'd had a word for when she signed a contract at a desk with borrowed heels still on, and 63,000 euros of debt pressing on the back of her skull. She didn't have a clean word for it a year later either. She had come to think that was all right. Some things were too specific to fit into the existing vocabulary. You just held them, and you learned their particular weight, and you carried them forward. "The researchers arrive next week," she said. "Yes." "Bellucci is going to be impossible about the cataloging protocol. He's always been impossible about the cataloging protocol. This time he'll have people to be impossible at." She looked back at the wall. "I'm going to need a better system for the comparative analysis files. The ones I've been keeping in the secondary cabinet are going to be insufficient once we have 3 researchers working from them." "Tell me what you need," he said. The same words as the night before everything broke open. He said them the same way, completely, without condition. She looked at him. "You," she said. "And time. And the work." She paused. "That's what I need." He took her hand. His hand was the same as it had been the first time. The weight of it, the specific temperature, the steadiness that came not from certainty about outcomes, but from a decision about how to live inside uncertainty. They stood in the empty ballroom in the converted space of their particular, imperfect, hard-won life. And outside the ancient city moved in all its ordinary noise, and the archive below held its documents in their sleeves and folders, waiting to be understood. And the wall where the stolen painting had hung was bare and clean and ready to become something else. That was where they were. That was what they had made. It was not a masterpiece. It was not finished. It would require work every day going forward, the way real things do. The kind of work that doesn't look impressive from the outside and doesn't resolve into a clean conclusion but continues and deepens and teaches you things about yourself that you couldn't have learned any other way. She had come into this house with borrowed heels and a mountain of debt and no particular plan except survival. She was leaving that version of herself in the room where it had happened, and she was keeping everything that had grown from it. The lamp in the corner of the ballroom was the only light on. It threw a warm line across the stone floor between them, and they stood in it, and it was enough.